I am going to call to order this meeting of the Task Force on Cannabis-Derived Intoxicants and Illegal Cannabis Production, also known in shortcut language as the HB 3000 Task Force. Our mission is to look at instruction given to us in House Bill 3000 and Senate Bill 1564 to develop a report, including final findings and recommendations for legislation to the Legislative Assembly. And our report is due by the end of this year. This is about the fourth or fifth meeting that we've had of this group. We also have a number of subcommittees that have been busy at work, and I think we are definitely on track to develop that report as we've been instructed. So we'll start this morning with attendance. Amanda, will you call our roll?
Yes. Senator Przanski.
Senator Przanski is here by video, but I will be transitioning to phone shortly.
Great. Senator Hansel.
Present by video.
Representative Marsh.
Marsh is here on video.
Representative Morgan.
Morgan present by video, but slightly phone.
Rob Bovet.
Present by video.
Scott Winkles. Sheriff Sickler.
Present by video.
Courtney Moran.
Present by video.
Matt Cyrus.
Here.
Jay Noller. Amanda Metzler.
Present by video.
Brent Kenyon.
Excuse?
Lauren Henderson.
Present by video.
Andre Urso.
Present by video.
Steve Marks.
Excuse?
Josh Eastman.
Here by video.
Our new Boley representative is Emily Sitton.
Present by video.
Justin Dillon.
Justin is, I believe, not present. I think he's away.
Okay, thank you. Amanda Swanson.
Present by video.
And Sergeant Bechtel.
Present by video.
Great, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you all for being here. When we started down this road, we looked at the assignments that we had from the legislation that I mentioned a few minutes ago, and we parceled things out. We thought that some of the subject matters were appropriate for our three subcommittees. We have subcommittees on law enforcement, on cannabinoids, and on water and natural resources. And we thought that some of the subject matters should really be discussed by the committee as a whole. So today, our primary agenda item is to really take on one of those items, and that is questions around the humanitarian elements in our illegal hemp operations, the worker issues. And we wanted to really hear today from people who are in the field who are doing this work. You will remember that as part of the short session, the legislature allocated $6 million specifically to community-based organizations to work on humanitarian issues, to try to elicit what the issues or supports were that were needed by workers in the field who very often, after an operation is busted, are left on the street without a dime in their pocket and not speaking the dominant language of the community. So today we are going to hear from some of these community-based organizations that received that money. We should note that they haven't had that money for a very long time. And so it will not be surprising to hear that their plans are still developing, but we're really anxious to hear what they're observing, what they are seeing, and from our point of view, specifically, what they need from our task force or from the legislature, perhaps in addition to ongoing funding. So with that, I think we have Karina Spencer-Shurich here from the Northwest Workers Justice Project. And you may be accompanied by Kathy Casey, who I think is here as well from Unite, largely based here in Southern Oregon and doing terrific work. So I'm going to hand the virtual note over to the two of you to tell us what you're saying, what we should be aware of, and what you need from us.
Thank you, Representative Marsh, and thank you everyone on the task force for the invitation. And I actually don't know, I have a PowerPoint, but I actually don't know this platform. I'm going to try. Let's see if this works. Can you see?
Oh, we got it. It's up.
Can you see just the one screen? Is that, are we good?
One slide. It's perfect. So
Great. Okay. Awesome. I'm winning already. So that's a success. So I'm like Representative Marsh said, I'm Karina Spencer-Sherrick. I'm an attorney and the director of the Northwest Workers Justice Project. And Kathy Kesey's on here. I don't know, Kathy, if you're off mute and want to introduce yourself.
Sorry about that. I'm Kathy Kesey, and I'm the program coordinator with Unite.
So we are part of the Cannabis Worker Resilience Project. This is let me see if I can flip my slides for you. This is what I think is extremely innovative and holistic partnership of community-based organizations, as Representative Marsh said, is being funded through the Criminal Justice Commission through HB 4074. We actually haven't received the money yet, but that does not mean we have not been doing the work and aren't ramping up. This is a group, I put the list of the organizations that are involved here, but 3 statewide legal organizations, NWJP, and the 2 legal aid program, their farm worker programs are involved. Unite in Medford and Centro de Servicios para Campesinos out of Woodburn. And we've partnered with Raíces de Bienestar, which is a mental health services organization. And we have the resources to really closely coordinate the provision of wraparound services for vulnerable, low-wage and immigrant workers who are being lured into the legal cannabis industry in a way that we've never seen before. We are also coordinating our services with J-Bar-J, which is the other CBO grantee that it's out of the Bend area. So we just got in contact with them recently, are working to coordinate our services as well. So like I said, the money hasn't started, but the work really is already ramping up. And I want to give Kathy, kind of first shot of talking about what they're seeing in Southern Oregon, because obviously that has been kind of the heart of the work that has already started.
Everyone, good morning. Like I mentioned before, my name is Kathy Kesey, and I'm the program coordinator for Unite, Center for Farm Worker Advocacy. Thank you, Chair Marsh and other committee members for inviting us here today to share what we've been doing so far. So as Karina had mentioned, we've been supporting ag workers here in a variety of ways since like 1996 in Southern Oregon, and we're really thankful for this opportunity to continue to expand our outreach to ag workers out now, even throughout the whole state, not just here locally in Jackson County, Josephine County. So the funding that we have received has, we haven't received, but we're like floating, right? Thank God. Has really given us the ability to help grow our services and establish stronger connections with agencies like law enforcement, with Homeland Security, and our other statewide legal services providers like Law Center, LASO, and Northwest Workers Justice Project, which has been always a goal of ours. That was always kind of, we've always had access to them, but this way it's a much more formal relationship. So then we're able to directly transfer over cases to them, and they're able to give us guidance as well on how to handle cases, new cases as they're coming in. So since September, we've been in contact with roughly over 100 workers who have already been requesting our services. Yesterday, there was a raid out near Rogue River. And so we currently have 11 workers that are temporarily being housed in hotels here in the Valley. In addition to that, we had other buses that we supported workers at. So we've also provided some additional transportation support. Some were needed to go, one was needing to go back to Tennessee because he was trafficked out here, and then didn't have a way to get back. So we provided transportation funds for them. Others have gone back to Miami, to Florida, to be able to go back home to their countries of origin. We've also done some employment support, helping local workers find jobs as well here in the area, and a lot of food for the workers who just needed a little bit of support until they found other employment like throughout the state and other parts of the country. So I just want to, that's really a brief update, but I just want to thank you all for supporting this program. This has made a significant difference, I believe, in the lives of the workers. Like I mentioned, we've been able to develop strategies with the sheriff's departments, not only here, but in Josephine counties as well. And we've been contacted by law enforcement from Klamath and from Lane County about how we can connect the services there. So we've developed a good strategy, I think, with Josephine and Jackson counties for providing services. Basically, they give us a call the morning of their raid, and our support staff goes out and brings the workers back into town. If there are workers that are interested in coming back into town, then we do that. We've also been able to develop a strong relationship with HSI for any human trafficking concerns. So if we feel like, if we get information that maybe law enforcement didn't receive about, it's kind of like a trust building relationship. So as soon as we get information from law enforcement or from workers that possibly there is a human trafficking issue, then we also have now direct access to the investigators at HSI who can help facilitate those interviews and things as well. So again, thank you again. Hopefully through the education and other efforts that we put forth in the community, it's going to make it's going to have a significant impact on the workers that are being displaced, or just knowledge of where they can access services, even if there isn't a raid, how they can access legal and other kinds of support services.
So I would say that Kathy and Unite have really been doing, a really amazing job of trying to like get in there and help workers, and the kind of cases we're seeing from them are everything. And I'll talk a little bit more of that, but some of it is, very violent threats and labor trafficking to things that are less scary and disturbing, but still extremely impactful in the lives of the workers in terms of what they're experiencing through wage theft. So Kathy and Dagoberto and the rest of the Unite staff have been really good about just trying to figure out meet people where they are and really support them. But what I want to do is step back a little bit and just try to also kind of give you an overview of what we're seeing in Southern Oregon and across the state. I mean, this isn't just happening in Southern Oregon. We have cases and workers who are coming forward in other parts of the state. And I'll say that they're coming forward and we haven't started our outreach and education. That's a big part of what we're planning to do it in through this partnership. So right now people are finding us. We're not even able yet to go out and get a full grasp of what's happening. But what we are seeing is ag workers, the kind of people we're seeing that are working in the illegal cannabis industry are local displaced workers, or displaced through COVID, through fires, through other economic means, and are being and sometimes are often being tricked. People are saying, oh, it's hemp, it's legal hemp, and there's no way for them to really know. But it's actually illegal cannabis, and either they realize it or never really know for sure. Later on, we're seeing traditional migrant farm worker communities. I mean, for a long time, the worker community in cannabis was young. It was primarily white. It was male. We're seeing that it's more and more rapidly becoming Latinx, older, more women in our traditional farm worker communities, what you might think of our traditional farm worker communities. People are being recruited from California and Washington to come work in Oregon cannabis industry. Oregon workers are being recruited into California, into Washington as well. So there's, people are crossing state borders to do this work. We're seeing workers being from the Willamette Valley, our traditional farm workers in the Willamette Valley are being recruited to Southern Oregon and other parts of the state to do this work. We're seeing a lot of visa holders from Mexico, H-2A workers, workers within the country on tourist visas in this industry. And we're also seeing untraditional farm worker communities, people from Laos, Argentina, Thailand, and even Europe who are in, and we're not totally sure how they're getting here or why they're getting here. So one of the things that we're working on trying to pin down, but we have been surprised, and it's been a challenge to serve people who who speak other languages besides Spanish. We The experiences of ag workers in the illegal cannabis industry is really a spectrum. And you know, Kathy and Unite have been going out to serve workers on criminal busts, but we're seeing, you know, workers come to us through other means, other paths that are really experiencing quite a spectrum. We see everything from fully illegal grows by very organized criminal operations to just your kind of standard licensed hemp operations that have like a side illegal marijuana operation as well. And we're seeing mom and pop issues in mom and pop operations, you know, just really a very wide spectrum of employers, which makes it challenging to figure out, you know, remedies and supports that workers need in each of those instances. We're also seeing a very wide spectrum of working conditions, everything from violence, threats, you know, traditional labor trafficking, you know, unsanitary and dangerous living conditions, lack of access to food. We see quite frequently what I would call systemic wage theft, where employer will recruit a crew of workers with the intention of not paying them. They, you know, get rid of those workers. They, you know, they take, you know, they drive them and take them off, and they never pay them, and then they do it again and again and again. So we have some cases where it's one employer has stolen the wages of, you know, generations of crews. And we're also just seeing simple, you know, undercapitalized employers who are unable to pay timely or regularly, who, you know, just, I can't pay you till I sell the product. That systemic wage theft and undercapitalized employers we're seeing in both the legal and illegal cannabis industries. For us, you know, obviously the consequences of violent and nonviolent criminal activity in our rural communities is really, it's a huge thing that I know a lot of you have been working very diligently on. But also I wanted to focus us on the fact that, you know, fair competition in the legal cannabis industry is really undermined by illegal employment practices and illegal cannabis industry practices, right? I mean, this is really our moment in terms of, you know, successful regulation and worker protection to make sure that our high road employers and businesses aren't drummed out of the cannabis industry by, you know, illegal practices, both criminal practices and worker exploitation more generally. So for us, this is a really important moment to make sure that this becomes a, you know, an industry that treats its workers well, that the people who win in this competition, moment of competition, are the good high road employers. So we, Kathy and I, we kind of scrambled with our partners to try to give you all some ideas of what we think are barriers to successful regulation and protection, just from our experience over the last couple of years as we've seen this ramp up. And so we asked kind of everybody to weigh in. So these are not super vetted or anything, but I wanted to get them in front of you as you all are thinking about this. So I kind of tried to group them. You know, we are really seeing a lack of labor trafficking resources. There's no one to really call if you have somebody who wants to report labor trafficking, right? There's kind of sometimes a lack of trust or capacity at local law enforcement agencies to handle these cases. It's very complicated to identify labor trafficking. There's not really you know, workers have varied needs in terms of what they need, and we can't really call on our federal resources like we might in other cases, right? Department of Labor won't get involved in cannabis cases, et cetera, right? So, you know, we have some of these supports and networks set up for sex trafficking victims, but we just don't for labor trafficking. And so we really would encourage some sort of statewide liaison and coordinator to be able to pull those resources together. We also, and my coworker did this, right? She had somebody who wanted to come forward, and she just called around the state. You know, she called DOJ. She called everybody to try to figure out what do we do with somebody who wants to talk about labor trafficking, and didn't find a lot of support or resources or a clear path to make that happen. Statewide training resources for law enforcement on trauma-informed interaction with workers and and identifying labor trafficking would be important. You know, I know some law enforcement agencies are good at this, but this is and some just aren't as good at this. This is a very vulnerable and scared worker population for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's even hard to sort out who's a worker and who's responsible. So we would encourage that. And also having kind of mobile, come to you, culturally responsive mental health services is something that would be important to be able to serve labor trafficking victims across the state. Under the kind of banner of legal licensing requirements, you know, it's our understanding that there are barriers right now to requiring that those who receive legal license agree to follow the laws regarding employment standards, farm labor contractors, workplace health and safety, and agricultural housing. But we think it's really important that that's a part of the legal licensing, and that license can and should be revoked upon violation of the worker standards. Again, the failure to follow employment laws is a sign that somebody is not engaged in fair competition in this industry, and we want to make sure that there's a level playing field. And it's important that our licensing makes sure to enforce, has a part to play in enforcing those protections. Also, the thing that we're running up against is that our workers and we are just baffled to know if something is illegal and licensed farmed, right? So if somebody's being recruited, it's very hard for them to tell what they're getting into until they get into it. And even then, sometimes they don't know. And so I know we can't like have a list online of every, legal marijuana and hemp grow in the state, like for security reasons. So our suggestion would be like a legal cannabis hotline so that workers could call and confirm the existence, the fact of a legal and licensed farm at a given address or for a particular employer. Because we're about to do all this outreach and we're like, oh, be careful, but there's no way for people to really be able to protect themselves to make sure that they are being careful. The other barriers we're seeing are, civil and criminal law enforcement barriers. BOLI simply doesn't have the resources that to be able to help us protect cannabis workers in a big, kind of systemic way, right? They don't have any, I think they're just gearing up for their an ag ACE program for ag, but even then that's really focused on overtime, and cannabis workers have particular needs and particular complications. And so we really encourage you all to think about directing resources at BOLI for this industry. Also, the big issue that we're seeing in the bus situation is that sheriffs are going out and seizing cash and other assets of businesses when they shut down an illegal grow. And that means that workers just aren't getting paid, right? That's cash that may have gone to workers or that was promised to workers. And so we really want to make sure that the Wage Security Fund, there's eligibility for workers affected by busts. Because sometimes, again, workers just don't know that they're going to be in a criminal enterprise until they get there, and even then they don't know for sure. So we want to make sure they're getting paid, and then we want to make sure that cash seized at busts is directed. I mean, obviously, due process considerations have to be followed, but we need to have provisions to make sure that the money is directed at for workers' wages, and that restitution in criminal cases includes repayments to Wage Security Fund and to unpaid workers. This has kind of come up. I'm going to try to do this quickly. Is information and communication is a problem. We are not experts in the marijuana industry, and neither are our clients. I mean, a lot of them know a lot about like berry cultivation or different types of crops or hops or whatever, but they're learning about hemp and marijuana. And I think it's important for us to get ahead of them in terms of doing outreach and education to farm worker communities about the differences between hemp and marijuana and how they're cultivated, how to try to figure out if something is an illegal or illegal grow, so that workers can try to start to protect themselves. And statewide interpreter resources for law enforcement agencies. I would encourage this. I mean, some law enforcement agencies are really good at this, but we're still seeing barriers in communication, and we don't want to leave it to law enforcement agencies allocating resources to it. We want there to be a statewide resource that's available that law enforcement agencies need to take advantage of so they can communicate well with workers. I know it's difficult. It's hard to find a Laotian translator in the field, right? But we need to figure out how to do that so that we can protect people well. So those are our quick overview. I didn't have a lot of time, but Kathy and I are here for any questions you may have.
Karina, Kathy, that was a wonderful report, really thorough. And I think you've given us a number of to-dos. And there may be questions about that. So colleagues, we can go back to the full screen. You can pull down the...
Did I do it? Or I don't know how to do this. Oh, I'm still presenting, showing you my whole thing. Did I do it? Yay.
Now we're back to basics. So questions about the presentation that we just heard? Comments?
Chair Marsh.
Yes. Is that
This
who
is
is
Rep
that?
Morgan. I'm on the phone now.
Oh, hi, Rep Morgan. Please go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to Unite and the group. I know that we've seen some horrific things in Southern Oregon, and there's more to be done. There's people that are still afraid to speak or to know where to get help, but that they have stepped up and tried to help. I just want to say thank you.
Agree. This is a really unusual and appropriate coalition of organizations that has come together to do this work, each bringing a different level of expertise. Tyler.
What a wonderful presentation. I'm glad we got an opportunity to see it. I wanted to make a couple of comments just as you're doing your planning. I wanted to point out that underrepresented in your presentation were ethnic Asian groups that are prevalent, especially in Northern Oregon, but also in Southern Oregon. The Hmong people are heavily involved in Northern California. I suspect just seeing some grows in Southern Oregon that's the case there. We have Toishanese people from the Guangdong province of China that are a traditional agricultural community in China. So they come here and work in agriculture, and that's the bulk of our Northern Oregon grows, mostly indoor. And then the Yao Men people, which is an ethnic group that kind of transcends the Asian borders, both in Laos, Thailand, and China. They're used for trimming quite often. So that's just been my experience over the last 4 years, and really encourage you guys to coordinate with those communities a little bit. And then just a thank you for your work. You know, it's really bleak as we talk about this. I feel like perspective is important for this committee. Estimates are that at any given time in the United States, 10,000 people are in a forced labor situation or being labor trafficked. We hear a lot about sex trafficking, but we don't hear about the 75% of people that are trafficked are into labor trafficking. And to give you an idea how bleak it is, one statistic was that there was 7 federal prosecutions in 2021. So if you've got, you know, estimates 10 to 15,000 people trafficked at any one time and 7 prosecutions nationwide, it's bleak. It's incredibly hard to prosecute, and it's work like this initiative that's going to help us get those prosecutions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lauren, you have a question.
Not really a question. Thank you, Chair Marsh. Karina, thank you. Very informative.
and your work is very good work and important. I wanted to make sure that you know and that everyone else know, and I have Sunny, the actual hemp registration data is available online for people to look. And so maybe you and Sunny can connect on where that is and how that gets made more available to folks. Amanda, I can't remember how much OLCC can put out there. I think you're limited, right? Is that right, Amanda? But the hemp information is out there, so we can connect with that later. So at least you have that piece.
Yeah, and we've accessed it online. It's just, for us at a computer, it's easy, but we need to figure out a way, I think, together, collaborate and get some resources on how we can help workers figure it out, right? So that they know what they're getting into. But I do appreciate that you all are doing the best you can to get it out as it is. Yeah.
It seems like, if I'll just jump in here for a minute, that's something that it comes in tandem with the idea of PSAs to the farm worker communities to help them understand how to sort all this out. And I'm wondering, given the breadth of your organizations, if that's something that you can take on in the context of this contract.
Well, we're definitely going to. I mean, we're going to do outreach and education. I mean, but I think for us, it helps if the government, like the message coming from multiple sources helps. And I also feel like, we're going to be learning about this industry, things that you already know, right? I mean, and our clients, we're going to be doing our best to educate ourselves on, like if this is present, then it means this, right? But some of that is, things that you all are already experts on. And like I said, I think the kind of educational input, if it comes from a lot of surfaces, then it starts to resonate, if that makes sense, right? So if they hear it from Kathy and I in a community presentation, and then there's a radio spot on it, it starts to make connections and people start to remember things better when they're hearing it from different people in different ways.
Absolutely. Sheriff Sickler.
Yeah, just maybe a comment for helping with some of the public awareness is, for the hemp, you can find out, where there's a licensed hemp grow, but you cannot, as a citizen, find out or a potential worker through the OLCC what is a legal and not legal site. And I was just curious, I understand kind of the OMMP piece when you're talking about a medical grow, although, most of these are seen easily from roadsides or other things. So it's not like people don't know that there's a grow there. So what is the restriction, or is there some historical information that we may have that would prevent us from maybe making a administrative rule change to where the OLCC had to post legal grow sites and access to the public? Because we do get a lot of questions about that from our citizens here in Jackson County, residents, and we also get it from our marijuana advisory committee about ways to have public be ensured that the grows operating next to their homes or in their areas are legal and on the up and up.
Amanda, would you like to respond to that? I know this is certainly, we've been talking about this issue for a long time, and I know that there are some security concerns around too much transparency. But
Yes,
what can you add
yes.
to that?
And Director Marks may be on the call or may not be, so I can go ahead and answer for OLCC. There's actually an exemption in statute to releasing the addresses for producers, processors, or wholesalers that are licensed by us. It's my understanding that originally was put into statute because people were afraid that they would be targeted if that information was made public. And so it's been that way since that we started licensing marijuana businesses.
That's kind of why we proposed this idea of a hotline, and I think it would work for both workers and neighbors, right? So you could call up and be like, my neighbor is that a legal or illegal grow? And if you could say, well, you already know the location, right? I can confirm that there is a legal license at that, or I cannot confirm, right? That would give you an idea of whether something was, the legality of something. That was why we came up with this idea of a hotline, right? Where you could get that kind of information.
Other questions or comments? Tyler.
Yeah, just a comment with that. I can see a criminal trying to confirm an address. I think in education and outreach, you're going to need to have a marijuana worker permit. So if they're calling OLCC and they're not being required to have a marijuana worker permit, it's incongruent. You'd be looking at hemp or a medical situation then if you're not required to have an OLCC worker permit. And so it's an education thing, and it's extremely complex, and it's probably quite an insurmountable task to do that in a number of different languages. And so I'm not sure how that's going to happen.
Well, then, I mean, if that's the case, I mean, if OLCC had the capacity to, be a customer service agency, to say, like, to get, dozens and dozens of calls, like, hi, do I need a permit to work at, they can say that, give that kind of information. I mean, they would need the resources to do that, and they would need to be staffed appropriately and have the language capacity, right? But again, if that's the kind of information, if that's the way to get the information to get around those security concerns, then I definitely encourage you all to think about how you could staff and handle OLCs and need to be able to give out that information.
Sunny, did you have your hand up?
I did. Good afternoon. I'm Sunny Summers, Senior Policy Advisor at ODA. I like your idea, Tyler, about the worker permit, but the worker permit is not tied to the business. So I could tell my employees that they need to get a worker permit. And I don't know that would necessarily solve what Karina's addressing. Karina, have you been tied into the labor task force that DOJ is currently operating concurrent with this work group? And if not, I'm happy to make that connection.
Yeah, my coworker, Bonnie Allen Saylor, is on that task force. And I know they're doing a deep dive kind of on the labor trafficking statutes to try to figure out, they're looking at the law about how is it appropriate to handle the situation that we're seeing, right? And so we're bringing to you more of the practical considerations about how to implement them. But yes, she is on that task force.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. I wonder, before we have a sort of a two-parter here, we're going to hear from DOJ about the labor trafficking work that's going on over there. So we'll start to understand what the work that's going on at DOJ, how it could impact some of the issues that Karina has brought up. But before we go there, I'm wondering if law enforcement has any comment on some of the law enforcement specific recommendations that came up, including access to translation services, trauma-informed training, and then that question about cash seizure, which is a probably bigger legal question. Any input or thoughts on those things from those of you who represent law enforcement?
I could say, we, with all the different ethnic backgrounds that we may encounter, that would be tough. But our guys and gals are pretty resilient as far as, using other means, language line or other things when we come across. We do have multiple Spanish-speaking detectives who are able to effectively communicate. We're great partners with Kathy, as you know, and HSI, who bring in, people who can translate or communicate effectively. So that's not necessarily a barrier for us per se down in Southern Oregon, but we've been kind of, doing this for several years now. I can speak for Josephine County. I know they probably have similar resources. We work together quite often, and the state police in our area. So I don't see that as being a big barrier for us. As far as trauma informed, that's interesting. I don't know that should be a requirement for the field work. The way we're doing these investigations, if we're trying to make a labor trafficking case, HSI has been kind of our lead in our area on that, just because of the federal nexus and in multiple states potentially, or even international ties. So they're doing those interviews on scene. And, for us, frequently I think our better avenue is probably coordinating with Kathy post, operation. meaning when they're able to get a rapport with people and then things about it. So making detectives in the field go through that kind of thing. Many of our detectives do have it, but I don't know that it's necessary for what's going on currently on the ground in our communities. And then seizure money, I mean, that's certainly interesting. We can't pay our own wages with that money, so that would be interesting to then say we should pay other people's wages. I don't know how that would look or what the rules are for that per se. So a couple challenges there, and maybe Sergeant Bechtel has some more information because he's on the ground a little bit more often than I am. But
Sergeant, do you want to add anything to that?
Just probably to echo the sheriff's words. Unfortunately, these are typically 1, maybe 2 day affairs when we go and serve warrants, and anything dealing with the labor trafficking or anything other than the eradication, it kind of takes a second chair to what we have to do, which is secure, make safe, and eradicate. So we typically, with kind of the trauma-informed training, any given warrant, I probably only have 3 officers that are actually having contact with suspects or workers. Everybody else has got a job to document something, to collect something. So, we would rely on our interpretation services to help us through any kind of situation as far as that's concerned. We're kind of getting the who, what, when, why, where, and moving on. As far as paying workers with seized assets, I could not see any way to do that except after a due process, so for like a state forfeiture, a portion of that goes to victims' restitution. Maybe there's can be some tweaks, but that's years down the road. It's not necessarily this pot of money can be distributed to these workers, but maybe there's a mechanism by where we could change a law that would allow them to be eligible for victim restitution. Good ideas.
Yeah, we don't see anywhere close to anything near like a dollar for dollar, on amount on a seizure. There's a lot of pots that it goes into, and it does take a lot of time. And so we're really getting back very kind of small percentages from a law enforcement perspective of the overall seizure. So it's not like, if we seize $1 million during the year, we have $1 million in our, it goes into our budget the next year. It's percentages of that, and sometimes very small, depending on how many people are involved in the case, and which do you go state forfeiture, federal forfeiture, and all of those things. So it is a complex thing. So I concur that maybe victim restitution in some sort could augment that if that was the desire.
And partially, our thinking is, victim, I think you're right, victim restitution maybe. And like I said, we didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this meeting, but I think that's one thing. And then, or maybe pairing it with wage security fund, then going through the due process, and then having victim restitution to go back into wage security fund, trying to figure out how that all might link together, because that's part of the heartbreaking thing for a lot of our workers, right? So it's like, that's the, as you all carry the money out, right? That's the cash we've been waiting for, right? That's what they promised us and now we're trying to pick up the pieces for them and trying to figure out how to get them back on their feet. They may have already, or were already going to be victims of wage theft, but obviously a bust makes it even harder to recover.
Yeah. And then the last thing, I know that I saw the piece about mobile mental health. Again, I think that service, I don't deal a lot with the individuals who have been victims, but that's probably a better service that is going through the consortium or your guys's organization post operation, instead of trying to get them out there the day of and have this response, but really something that is integrated, through, I would say, Kathy Kissy and Unity, because that's just who we call and the organization we work with so closely. But having those services provided secondary and maybe not necessarily the mobile piece, because it's hard to coordinate enough with these operations, and then trying to get all these other entities involved is difficult as well.
One of the concerns I'll raise for you, obviously we're going to do as much of that as we can. One of the concerns I have over the next few years is that you guys are obviously gearing up as sheriffs, and being very proactive about addressing what is a crisis in your community. And my concern is that this is going to shift around the state, and that suddenly new sheriffs are going to have to get up to speed, and find the resources, places that Kathy isn't, right? And so I don't want to be behind. I don't want to play whack-a-mole a little bit, right? And that's what in some ways we're trying to figure out how to be coordinated statewide, so that if these kind of operations move around, we can be swift in terms of how we gear up.
And it does seem like there's a lot of evidence that, in fact, it has moved into new counties. So support you in that. So I want to shift now to part 2 of this, and we're going to invite Amanda Swanson, who is on with the DOJ labor trafficking discussions that are going on. I know Rep. Morgan has sat in a number of those meetings. I've sat in a few, not enough to say I know exactly what's going on, though. And so, Amanda, we're really interested in the conversation there and how you think there might be intersections with the presentation that you just heard. So take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rep. Marsh. I'm Amanda Swanson. I'm the Human Trafficking Intervention Coordinator with the Oregon Department of Justice. Our Legislative Director, Kimberly McCall, is actually our Labor Trafficking Task Force chair. And so the task force was actually founded in 2020 as a work group, and it had a little bit of ebbs and flow, obviously, with the pandemic, and then we have just kind of really ramped up the last year. We have brought in a variety of different experts from other jurisdictions presenting what is working, not only what they're doing around the state, but around the country. And some of the lessons that we've learned is that there are really focused places that are responding better because there are local actors who are really motivated in making it work in their local communities. But we want to do something different in Oregon. When I started this position about 7 years ago, we really had this vision of a no wrong door approach, of a statewide response. And while we've started with minor sex trafficking, the goal is that this would encompass all of human trafficking. And it's a perfect time to now incorporate and have been incorporating labor. I chair our labor trafficking victims services subcommittee of the bigger task force. And we just received a federal grant through the Office of Victims of Crime. We just found out about a week ago that we received it. We wrote for $1.5 million. And with that grant, we will be providing regional law enforcement trainings, 2-day trauma-informed law enforcement trainings around the state for the next 3 years. It's going to encompass labor trafficking trainings, sex trafficking, trauma-informed interview practices, working with the massage parlor and buyers. So it's really going to be encompassing a lot, but there will be definite significant pieces around labor trafficking and what that looks like. With that grant, we are also going to be able to hire a labor trafficking specialist that is going to be kind of our statewide specialist, partnering with me, that's going to be really focusing on how we build our response across the state and support our counties, not just in Southern Oregon, but across the state. So really leaning on what we've already built in the infrastructure and expanding it to really kind of fill some of these gaps. We identified that it needed to be a bigger statewide response. And so we now have the funding through this grant that just started actually this month and will go for the next 3 years to really kind of lay the foundation for some of this work. So really exciting things that are happening with that grant. And that grant is really focusing on victim services and how we can amplify those services, how we can support training, even look at consistent, succinct training throughout the state so that we have consistent basic training around what labor trafficking is and how to respond. We're doing the same thing with sex trafficking. some of the things with the task force at large, when we're looking at policies that we have kind of waded through and figured out what we needed to focus on, we've identified a number of policy areas that there are improvements that need to be made. Our criminal laws need to be tweaked and updated. They haven't been updated. They're not really usable. And so we're looking at the criminal laws and what that looks like so that we could actually look at this from a state perspective, and looking at what that prosecution would look like, because we don't have a labor trafficking ORS, and kind of making those laws a little bit easier to use. Part of that also, we've identified that there needs to be more victims protection, especially when there's forced criminality attached to their trafficking. They're now looking at private rights of action that can be taken against their traffickers. Next year, we're really going to be focusing, the whole Crime Victims' Rights Month is going to be focused on labor trafficking and sex trafficking. So really pushing out a ton of information around crime victims' rights so folks know what their rights are as crime victims. And then we're also trying to partner, and we're working with CJC around U visas and the reporting requirements, and kind of helping them continue with victims so that they have the resources and the documents that they need as investigations and other things are going on. One of the things that Kimberly really wanted me to relay is that we have this whole set of policy improvements that we're going to be proposing this session, that don't have a fiscal impact, so we're really excited that they probably will be able to really help the work that we're doing. However, we see a huge gap in needing a resource prosecutor, because we have been reliant upon the feds to take these cases. And I think it would be really helpful to have somebody, and we've seen this through DV and a few other areas where DOJ has had resource prosecutors and has really helped prosecute these cases and see what that looks like and help local prosecutors and training and different things like that. So that is one area where there possibly would be a fiscal impact of a recommendation that eventually we would like to have a resource prosecutor for labor trafficking. I think that would be really helpful. But our policy areas that we're going to be working on generally this next session aren't really going to have a fiscal impact. So hopefully they will help amplify and I guess help the laws be a little bit easier to use. But that is pretty much the update of what we're doing at DOJ.
Thank you, Amanda. So glad to hear you got that federal money. That sounds like a game changer. So the question that was posed by Karina was, or the issue was, that they are finding in the field that there's no one to call for labor trafficking. So will that change with the federal money? Will that allow you to build enough of an infrastructure that somebody will be there to answer the phone?
Yes and no. I think yes for service providers and building that kind of response, and like when there's a case, when there's a person that needs to report, when they need victim services, it's going to be really around that victims. Yes, there will be a coordinator, there will be somebody to respond and refer them. We'll have a better sense of what resources are out there, who's been trained, and what that looks like. It won't necessarily be around like reporting illegal grows or different things like that, but it will be wrapped around the victim services. Yes, that specialist will be the person that they can call.
Oh, that's really good news. And just to be totally clear, the package of reforms that you're talking about are going to be, and potentially the resource prosecutor. It wasn't clear to me whether you are moving forward with the fiscal aspect.
I don't know if Kimberly is going to be moving forward with the resource prosecutor. I think she's trying to gauge what that looks like. I do know that we have this funding for the next 3 years, and this is the second time we've applied for this funding. We're not going to be able to apply for it again. And so I think in 3 years, we're going to have a fiscal impact of what DOJ's programs are going to look like, and then we're going to probably need to have a big ask. So I think Kimberly's trying to figure out what's going to be most effective and looking long term for these programs, how we can be sustainable. I don't know if she's going to be asking for a resource prosecutor, but I do know that that is one need that we see, that it should be, that is a recommendation moving forward. We're going to need one.
Got it. But the other things you talked about, criminal law updates, private right of action, you're moving forward on those things.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. So we can members of this task force can be supportive of that package when it comes forward from DOJ.
Yes. Yes, and if you have any questions, Kimberly said that she is more than available and would love to answer any questions. She's the policy expert. I'm just working with her.
Great. We know you're an expert too, Amanda. Are there questions? Corinna or Kathy, if you have questions about how any of this would intersect your work, you are most welcome to ask them also.
No, I'm excited to hear about the funding. I think that would really help, right? I mean, I think we, you know, to the extent we're relying on HSI and the federal government, I think we need to have our own enforcement of our own statutes, and I'm glad DOJ is looking at that, right? That's going to be a big important thing if we're really focusing on sex trafficking. Has got a lot of resources, but we now with these cannabis cases, we really need to be working on labor trafficking, and I'm glad that DOJ is going to be a partner in that.
Great. Okay, colleagues, I don't see any hands up. So Amanda, thank you so much for being here. That was a terrific update. Sounds like things are happening there that will be quite relevant to our folks in the field, and we appreciate the intersection of the work. And Corinna and Kathy, thank you as well for being here and giving us the update as well as your recommendations around the barriers that you're starting to identify in this work. You're doing, I think what you heard from this task force is overwhelming appreciation for the really broad breadth that you are bringing to the work. Any last comments from the two of you?
We're just really appreciative that you guys have so much focus on this and are really partnering with us to try to make a difference and move the needle. So thank you so much.
So let me
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Pam.
I was just going to ask the two of you one last question, because this will be relevant for sure. Is you got a grant? Your part of the grant was, I think, $5.5 million or close to that. Are you going to use that all up in the next 2 years? You're going to need more money?
It'll be three years. I think it ends 2025. Yeah, we will.
And is that money to get you through 2025?
I mean, so far we don't know exactly what we're going to find, Representative Marsh. Like I said, right now we are overwhelmed by the cases that are just walking in our doors or where the sheriffs are calling us, but we know the problem is much bigger. So when we do the outreach and education, which I think in the next year we'll have a much better idea of the volume of the work and how quickly we're going to spend down those resources.
Okay. I just wanted to mention that I'm just grateful that, because probably as enforcement increases in like our counties in Josephine, Jackson County, that as growers are going to be moving to other areas of the state, that there's like a statewide approach on how to deal with this. Because as Karina was saying, it's going to move as they find easier places that people maybe aren't as proactive or whatever, but I also have a concern though with that, because here in Jackson County, Josephine County, our work with ICE has been as seeing these people as really as victims of crime and not as as illegal immigrants. And so I hope that in other areas of the state where there isn't that kind of presence that we have here in Jackson County, of the attitude that we see them as victims of crime, that they continue to be viewed as victims of crime and not be seen as undocumented aliens and be deported. So that's another, I don't know how we could incorporate that into some of the statute or whatever, but I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind as well.
Could I chime in,
Sure.
Marsh, real quick? So just a little background for people that don't know is the OSSA, which represents it's an association for all of the sheriffs. We talk about these issues. We actually have a marijuana enforcement kind of subcommittee because we did see it spreading. We've offered training down in Southern Oregon that was hosted by the Josephine County Sheriff's Office and my office for other agencies within the state. So we do have, outreach in those other places since we have had experience with this for many years. And so I just want you to know that we do talk, we do coordinate, and we are working on having standardized approaches to how we do things. Now, each community is its own for sure, but we're trying to make sure that professionalism and all of the things that we've seen so far continues throughout the state. So I think that'll put a little bit at ease. I don't know that we I don't know that we need to legislate anything per se about the interactions with it. I think a lot of people believe that we're doing things well down in Southern Oregon, and we'll probably try to help emulate that. I know I've talked to other sheriffs who've asked for your information, Kathy, and how do we get on board and stuff. So I think the word will spread. And I think it will organically move, especially with our nudge down here in Southern Oregon.
Great, thank you, Sheriff. That was super helpful. All right, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your expertise out in the field. So, colleagues, we'll move now to the rest of the agenda. Today was really more of a scheduled as an informational day, and to give us a chance to really delve into the humanitarian worker issues. In 2 weeks, we have a meeting coming up where we're going to start to weave together all of the assignments that have been parceled out through the subcommittees to start to look at what our set of recommendations will consist of. So I want everyone to be aware on the 21st, we are going to ask for the recommendations out of the 3 subgroups and out of the funding group, and potentially out of really an assignment that went to Steve Marks around the regulatory system. So that will be a big meeting on the 21st, as we'll expect to hear the substantive recommendations. Is there anybody who has a concern about whether or not those recommendations can be provided at that time? Sheriff, your hand is still up. I don't know if you have another comment, you are welcome. Okay. Any concerns about the 21st? If not, then anyone who's going to be reporting to us on that day, you have 2 weeks to do frenzied effort to be ready to come back and tell us what you think we should be recommending. Senator Hansel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm out of state on the 21st. I will try to join, but I don't know yet exactly what that will look like, but I'll do my best to be a part.
Understood.
And I don't want you to change it on my behalf, but I just wanted to give you a heads up.
Great. Well, we will certainly catch up with you if you're not able to be with us. We do have a timing issue, by the way, on that meeting on the 21st that I want to talk about after we move through this question of having the recommendations ready. Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few quick updates, if I might. Our funding group meets early next week. We will try to develop recommendations, but keep in mind those numbers will be just our initial estimates based on the information we have now. So folks will need to be very flexible with the numbers we come up with. The presentation here today has been incredibly helpful in that regard as well, since we'll be talking about all 3 buckets of the funding and potentially future buckets as well. I should just also mention, maybe for the record, I did provide Senator Brzezinski a 6th draft of the recommendations coming out of the Law Enforcement Subcommittee. No substantive changes well, I guess they are substantive. We recognize that some of the changes needed further work, and so I've now integrated the recommendations from the Oregon Judicial Department and the Oregon Department of Justice into the 4th draft. So we've got it's just cleaning up some of the language we worked on. So that should be ready to go. And those are my updates for those 2.
Great, thank you, Rob. And I want to note the Water and Natural Resources Subcommittee has generated a few recommendations that I think we've thought were best dealt with by law enforcement. So we'll want to make sure that those got to you for your consideration. And to be clear, the 21st is just our first draft. It's just all of us starting to pull together what this report would look like. Noted that there'll be a lot of work that happens after that. There can be, there may be work that goes into the session, but our goal is by the end of the year to really understand the package of legislative recommendations that we want to move forward. Okay, so the next question about the meeting on the 21st is whether or not we could move that meeting to 11 o'clock. So it would be 11 to 12:30 or 1. Anybody, is that impossible for anyone? Okay, so Amanda, if you could send out that meeting change to everybody on the list, make sure that we catch people who weren't here today, as well as remind all of us to update our calendars.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Great. And with that, we're not going to do recommendations from subcommittees today because we're going to hear full recommendations in 2 weeks. But we do have a few minutes for any quick reports from the ground, anything that we should know about that those of you who are out there working with people, we got the humanitarian view. That was super helpful and sobering. From those of you in law enforcement, anything unusual that you're seeing or updates that we should know about? Sheriff or Sergeant?
Our team has been busy. We're still in the phase of trying to bolster staffing, so hiring, recruiting, hiring. So, we knew that was going to be the case once we got the funding, that it would take a little bit to ramp up. But they've been busy. I think yesterday we hit a location that was mentioned in the presentation this morning. I think there was a pretty substantial, I think there's 3 different plots. There's going to be a lot of complaints that we will be unable to get to this year, not as bad as last year. So overall, we've seen an improvement this year in our county, and I think in Josephine as well, as far as the grows have not been as prevalent or as large. But last year we had 500 locations we could not investigate complaints. And then this year we'll have many, probably a few hundred that we're unable to get to, but it's still progress from what it was last year. So I'm optimistic that, with increased enforcement next year, hopefully staffing wise, that we'll be able to put a bigger dent into things, and we'll see. But we are being mindful that tactics are changing slightly with the growers, the illegal growers, as far as kind of diversifying their locations or whatnot, so making it a little more difficult. So the sites aren't as big, the worker populations aren't as big, but they may be spread out into more different locations, a little bit more off the beaten path than they were last year for us. Last year, they were just everywhere, and this year they're hidden a little better. So they're adjusting tactics, and then we've seen that for many years. So it'll be interesting to see what next year brings for sure. We're winding down in the essentially the growth season, and then we'll still be busy with operations. I mean, we don't really have a downtime like we did a few years ago because we're still following up on things, and we still have processed marijuana that we will be looking at, going after, or other things associated with it, shipping, other different types of criminal activity associated with the black market. So very busy, but better than last year.
Yeah, thank you. Sergeant Bechtel.
So in the northern half of the state, we've served warrants besides with my team and the Yamhill Polk Criminal Justice Commission initiative. Together, we've served about 10 warrants on outdoor marijuana grows since the end of August. All of them, 20 to 50 hoop houses. Just a trend that I've noticed statewide is we're really not seeing that many wholly outdoor grows where they just put plants in the field. It's all turned to hoop houses to maximize the growing season. Our prevalent problem, but less visible up here in the north, still remains indoor marijuana grows. As a result of those indoor grows, we average about 1 fire response a month, whether they melt the weatherhead of the power coming into their building or if there's indoor wiring issues. We've strengthened our partnerships this growing season with code compliance, water masters, and we're starting to hit a stride there. And unusual stuff that we've found, I believe my team alone has recovered somewhere around 5 tractors, a couple excavators, and some other heavier equipment. If I'm pulling a number out of thin air, it'd be somewhere around $300,000 worth of agricultural equipment that we've recovered at illicit marijuana operations that had been stolen. And also something unusual, we found 8 horses and 4 cattle that were in need of rescue recently at a marijuana grow. Unfortunately, a few of those horses did not survive, but we saved some others. That's one of the best things that I've done in drug enforcement in a while is save some horses, and learned a lot from the Oregon Humane Society on that case, and we look forward to charging some of those animal neglect charges.
Thank you. Lauren and then Josh.
Yeah, Chair Marsh, I just wanted to report really quickly. Our hemp team just completed their first statewide inspection effort. They've been to all of the parts of the state. Last year, if you remember, we focused really hard on Southern Oregon. We'll update the numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head, other than just to say the illegal compliance issues are significantly less than they were the year before. So we are making progress. They're not gone, but we have made tremendous progress. And just as a shout out again to Sheriff Sickler and the OSP and the county folks, they've gone along and then along our partners with OLCC to get to as many of those places as we possibly could. I think we were able to be more targeted this year based on last year and where we kind of needed to start looking first, which was a good head start to this. And like I said, we'll update the numbers and bring them back to everybody on what we found and kind of what the issues are that we have and where we need to go going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Josh.
So just Josephine County update. We've doubled the size of our team, so we have 4. One of our judges quoted us as saying, you guys are doing 1.2 warrants a day, 5 work days. So each detective hits a grow each day of the week, so much so an increase here. They're not as big, like Sheriff Sickler said. We don't have any 100+ hoop houses anymore. But there's enough that our assigned DDA can't handle all of them, and I've actually split the marijuana cases with that DDA, so there's nobody else to do it. So I have 50 or so marijuana cases of my own now. But the same issues, we actually have started, I would estimate probably half of them now include, I always forget the number because it's in the 500s and I don't use ORS 500s very much, but probably about half of them have unlawful appropriation of groundwater now, as they're using their wells and pretty intricate systems throughout in these properties to water with, like, there's PVC pipe coming out and then spread throughout from the well. And as the water is probably the #1 issue long term, we are adding those whenever we can. So that's where we're at. It's hopefully it's going to get a little slower for me because I have other stuff like these meetings and homicides. But as harvest season is over, we typically have a shift to indoor and violent crimes associated with harvest and cash, which we're all crossing our fingers doesn't occur this year.
Thank you, Josh. I want to note, just in reference to Josh's comments about water, that our Water and Natural Resources Subcommittee is recommending an expansion of language to make it clear that people can be prosecuted for the use of water from whatever source for the growth of illegal plants as defined on it. So Brent and then Emily, and then we'll wind it up.
Thanks, Chair Marsh. I just have a follow-up question for law enforcement team as far as where I know obviously they're doing a great job. We are seeing a huge reduction just on the other side of it. What we hear on the street, I can tell you a lot of people are not interested in growing based off of the new conditions, not just the crush of the market, but knowing there's some potential prosecution if they keep doing it. So I think their efforts are definitely working. I think maybe more so than even being mentioned. It's a huge reduction that we've seen. So they're doing a great job. But I am curious what, maybe more so for Tyler, how we're looking as far as the indoor grows go. There is still a significant amount of black market indoor moving. And I'm just wondering how more specifically what that looks like. And maybe Nate can speak to it a little bit down here. I know there's several operations down here too that are still kind of functioning. So obviously light dep will continue for a little while, still have some grow stuff going, and people do use the hoop houses indoors. So just maybe they can speak to that briefly. I know they mentioned it, but I'm just curious how much indoor activity we're actually being able to kind of track down.
So you both spoke to this a little bit in your reports in terms of tracking the the level of activity. Anything specific you want to add about indoors?
I think Tyler probably deals with that a little more up north just because of the weather conditions. But I can say that for this summer months, into the, where the grow season's out there, our focus of our team is really trying to get that, because it's kind of the seasonal piece of the year, and then focusing on the other things, as we move along into the winter. So I'm sure if we have inclinations that those are occurring, our team will shift and investigate those thoroughly as well. It's just, as we have about 4 months to get after the outdoor stuff and whatnot. So.
And Tyler, Sergeant.
Yeah, so the indoor is kind of a unique animal because what I don't think the public wants me to do is go hit houses where somebody has a handful too many plants. So what we really focus on when we're looking at the indoor grows is we're trying to tie multiple locations together, and we're really looking at the organized crime factor of those. We're looking for that public safety component. So I want to respond to those that I know have BHO labs, or those that are causing fires through poor electrical, or if I know there's a felon who has weapons, or there's weapons involved. So that's where our biggest problem is separating the neighborhood nuisance complaint from the transnational criminal organization, and so we're really focused on that. But those are very long-term investigations. We had one that we had somewhere around 5,000 man hours into. Property is now being sold by the U.S. Marshals as a result of that investigation. But it was multi-state, ethnic-based organized crime. Really kind of separating that between the neighborhood nuisance, because really there's a local law enforcement function for that, and I feel like our impact can better be made when we're looking at organized crime, public safety, guns, BHO, those kinds of things. So that's really our focus. It's our focus year round, but then we kind of try to hit overdrive in the summer and grab those visible outdoor operations. Back to our, really quick to wrap it up, but back to our earlier conversations, there is labor trafficking in both of those. I'm finding while there's not always 20 people inside an indoor marijuana grow, there's often people that don't speak English in a house with no car, 8 miles up a gravel road with very little communication. Their food is delivered to them. They're effectively enslaved by their surroundings. And so, that's also something that we're looking for too, is that labor trafficking component.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And Emily.
I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm the compliance manager of the Agricultural Compliance and Education Unit at BOLI, which is a brand new unit. I just started in September. We have funding for 2 investigators for the whole state for ag wage and hour issues, as well as we have some jurisdiction to handle civil rights issues as well, and 1 part-time training and development specialist. So glad to be a part of this task force. If anybody has any questions about BOLI or what types of things we enforce or look at, happy to answer questions. I previously was an investigator and investigated a lot of cannabis, marijuana cases. So I have that perspective as well if people have questions going forward. But happy to be here and nice to meet all of you.
Thank you, Emily. You probably understood when we heard earlier today that we need more BOLI resources.
Yeah, as I said, we have two ag-focused investigators for the whole state. We do have other teams of investigators, but they are focused on other types of wage and hour issues. So Everything that was mentioned in the presentation today is definitely something we've seen in the cases that we've dealt with at Bully as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. We are glad to have you here. So Amanda, I think the last thing on our agenda is public comment. Did we have anyone who signed up for public comment today?
Nobody signed up for this meeting.
Okay, so no public comment. So with that, colleagues, I think we have concluded the work on our agenda. We will reconvene in 2 weeks. Please save 11 to 1 on your calendar, because I think as we get these reports from our subcommittees, again, it's preliminary, but we're going to want to have plenty of time to ask questions or vet those recommendations a little bit. And with that, unless there's anything else, Amanda, that you're suggest that I'm forgetting.
Nope, everything's great. I'll go ahead and send the group an updated calendar item that reflects the time change for the 21st.
Great. And then I will go ahead and adjourn today's meeting. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.